Haman is a name mentioned in the Quran, a villainous figure who appears as a court official at the time of Moses' Pharaoh. This would be at a time period of around 1300 BC. The Quran describes his high rank by placing Pharaoh's soldiers as also being his own when it says their soldiers in Quran 28:8. There is some intertextual allusion in the description of Haman in Quran 28:38, who served as someone in charge of building projects, drawing parallels with the Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11. Even the same terminologies are used about making bricks by baking them to make a tower in both books. There is, however, another Haman in an earlier book than the Quran. This person is the main antagonist in the book of Esther. According to the Bible, he was an official in the court of the Persian Empire under King Xerxes, who died in 465 BC. So it stands to reason that the Quranic Haman and the biblical Haman cannot be the same person, as they lived around 1,000 years apart and 1,000 miles away from each other. They were also of different nationalities and religions. Despite the differences, there are some obvious significant similarities other than their names. Both Hamans were enemies of the Jews and wanted to destroy them. Both held high positions in their respective royal courts. There is also the insinuation of their priestly religious role in Islam, according to some exegetes, connecting him to being a high priest of Amun, as well as his role as an advisor to the ruler. In the Bible, he claims reverence with the need for others to bow to him, as well as his advisory role to the ruler. Both come from obscure origins of insignificance to rising to the very top of their respective societies. Both died ignominious deaths for their disobedience to God in their plot to kill the Jews. In an oral society at the time of the formation of the Quran, it seems highly probable, as it seems too coincidental for it not to be a possible conflation between the accounts of Haman as found in the Bible with that in the Quran. The origin of the name Haman is equated with the old Persian Omanis or Imanis. In ancient Greek, the same name was simplified hyperchoristically to Aman, which is the Greek name found in the Septuagint Bible. Middle Persian variants were Hamayun, commonly pronounced as Humayun. The name means blessed, auspicious, royal, imperial, illustrious, or magnificent. On page 399, Macauliffe's Encyclopedia of the Quran mentions, in their attempts to link the name to ancient Egyptian as opposed to Persian, it cites the previously Muslim suggestion about how it could be the Arabized form of Ha'amen, a title which roughly translates to incarnate of the god Amun, a term utilized by the high priest. An individual called Maurice Bucaille, in his book called Moses and Pharaoh in the Bible, claimed an engraving of the name Haman was found in a hieroglyph, and this alleged Haman was connected to the Pharaoh of the Quran. Since this claim was made, Muslims have produced a litany of articles, books, and videos linking it to the Quran's so-called miraculous status. This video needs to be paused at this juncture so that the pages could be read, as some of his claims will be discussed next. Here is the actual reference to what Bucaille was referring to. He quotes from a book written by German Egyptologist Professor Heinrich Rank. When this is analyzed, it becomes all too evident that it does not say the name Haman categorically, as was being claimed by Bucaille, nor can it be said definitively that they are the same person, as the letters HMN are not an exact match for the Quranic Haman. Not only is it an abbreviation, the exact vowelization is not included, so it can be pronounced in a few different ways. It also includes extra adjectives such as merciful and great suffixed after the name, suggesting it could be a deity rather than a person. Nor does Bucaille mention the dating of these hieroglyphs, because if it is from around 1300 BC, then it would have a bearing to the validity of his claims. But if it predates the chronology of the Quranic Haman, then it would invalidate it. However, if it postdates it by many years, then it would make the argument less compelling. Suppose the name is the same as Haman, although it is not. It still does not follow that they are the same person, just like when Muslims argue the biblical Haman is not the same as the Quranic one. For a more detailed analysis of Rank's book, number 24 says Haman is great, and to dispel any ambiguity in the brackets it says in German der Gott, which means the God. This is repeated for 26. For 25 there is a question mark in parenthesis. Footnote 2 explains it is abbreviated for Haman, Hatep, a collocation that means Haman is merciful. Number 26 shows the hieroglyphic signs as an abbreviation transliterated for Haman, Hatep. This binomial expression does not seem like the same name as the Quranic Haman. The point is, the reading of this does not give a like-for-like connection to the Quranic Haman which Bucaille espouses, and subsequent Muslims have eagerly latched onto. In the Quran, the personhood of Haman never claimed he was a god, nor made the claim he was merciful. At the top is a hieroglyph of the word Hatep, which on its own roughly translates to be satisfied, at peace. The word also refers to an offering, ritually presented to a deity or a dead person, hence, be pleased, be gracious, be at peace, etc. Egyptian deities as well as past rulers have had the word Hatep suffixed to their names. In reference to the previous slide, for further proof it is not the Quranic Haman, here again is the hieroglyph transliterated as HMN. The name is found again on page 300 of Rank's book. Entry number 16. In the German, the text means, "My will is in the hand of the God HMN." So clearly HMN is an expression of devotion to a deity, and that deity is the god Haman, who is from amongst the pantheons of ancient Egyptian gods. The Louvre in Paris has a sculpture of the falcon god Haman. Oxford University's Griffith Institute uncovered hieroglyphs with Haman the deity mentioned in these papers. In the inscription of Hornefer, the deity Haman is mentioned. This has been highlighted in yellow for ease of reference. It can be seen for comparison that the hieroglyph spelling from Rank's book for the name transliterated as HMN that Bucaille quotes from for the Quranic Haman is the same for Haman, the falcon god. In the translation it mentions how the god Haman is synchronized with other deities such as Horus. Also, in Egypt's long history, there have been similar sounding names to Haman, and what's more, one who was an important architect was a figure called Himeno. He was a high-ranking official who lived during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. This is over 1,000 years before the supposed time of the Quran's Haman, so they cannot be the same people. Himeno's titles included Member of the Elite, Vizier, King's Seal Bearer, High Priest, Overseer of all construction projects of the king, and many other titles. The last one is particularly interesting as it indicates that Himeno was most likely the one responsible for building the Great Pyramid. So here is another example of someone who sounds ominously like Haman but is not, a person who was a member of the royal inner circle and the chief constructor for the pharaoh, someone who would have fitted the Quranic narrative perfectly but does not because he falls outside the chronological timeline by over 1,000 years to be the same person. Furthermore, the title of Chief of Construction was passed on from one person to the next. It was not reserved for one person in Egypt's long history. For example, currently in Egypt's museum is its oldest papyri. It is a logbook written more than 4,500 years ago by a middle-ranking inspector named Mera, who details the construction operations for the Great Pyramid as it was nearing completion. The inspector noted that the vizier Ankaif was now the chief for all the works of the king, as he was now overseeing the enormous construction project. Another bit of information the apologists have desperately latched onto in order to try and make it fit the Quranic narrative is from an inscription found on a doorpost located at the Art History Museum in Vienna, Austria. The relevant part states, for the spirit Ka of the overseer of the stonemasons of Amun Hemen-hetep, true of voice. The full translation is included here. The following observations are important for the discussion against the Muslim claims. The name is rendered as Amun Hemen-hetep, not just Haman. The Quran never directly connects Amun or the adjective Hetep to his name, as archaeology has uncovered. There is a date range from the higher range of 1300 BC to the lower range of 1000 BC, so it's not completely within Moses' time. It mentions someone dying of old age, but according to the Quran, Haman died a violent death by being drowned whilst chasing the Israelites in Quran chapter 28 verses 38 to 42. Also, the full text of the inscription does not mention the personal name of any pharaoh, nor a statement that this person was in any way personally connected to the pharaoh. It only contains a standard offering formula that exists in many inscriptions and to many an individual within ancient Egypt. Such formulaic expressions such as for the spirit Ka and true of voice have changed very little over the centuries. Here is an article called An Offering for the Dead that explains this. The link is in the description, as well as academic studies on this. But if the inscription is read correctly, the subject of the prayer is not Amun Hemen-hetep, but for an anonymous person who was the overseer of the stonemasons of Amun Hemen-hetep. The mention of a son and of a mistress from the house does not shed any more light as to who he was, but it certainly does not indicate it is the Quranic Haman. Finally, as will be shown shortly, the term overseer of the stonemasons is not a significant title, certainly one not befitting the Quranic Haman. In his book Moses and Pharaoh in the Bible, on page 193, Bukale cites the work of Brzezinski. The full reference is here, but Bukale only mentions that this Haman was the chief of the workers in stone quarries, and fails to mention the middle part of the hieroglyph, which means of Amun, thereby giving the impression that Haman or Haman was the chief of all such workers in all the stone quarries in the whole of the Egyptian Empire. The actual line consists of 3 parts: a symbol of a name transcribed as HMNH, another that means chief of the stone quarry workers, and in the middle of the inscription a symbol that means of Amun. So what the hieroglyph actually shows is that Haman-Hetep was the chief of stone masons, and that he was a devotee to Amun, an Egyptian deity revered as king of the gods. At this juncture, it still cannot be deduced definitively whether Haman-Hetep is a person's theophoric name or the deity Haman as shown earlier, because in the pantheons of Egyptian deities they were often unified, creating synchronized gods such as Amun-Ra. Oxford University's research cited earlier found Haman was synchronized with Horus. This is also found in the inscription or Hor-Nefer cited earlier. Also, as there were many gods and many stone quarries in ancient Egypt, there would have been many chiefs of stone quarries, and this title was often designated to people of low status. This will be evidenced shortly. So the role is not as significant as the person in the Quran who was not merely a chief of stone quarries, but a chief minister and vizier. So being a close confidant to the Pharaoh himself, he should have had the title chief of the king's works. Also, if Quran 28:38 is read, it indicates this Haman was not to have associations with any other deity except for the living Pharaoh, not even to Amun. Quran 26:29 has Pharaoh threatening to punish with imprisonment to anyone who did. So the previous hieroglyph cannot be referring to the same Haman, otherwise the Muslim apologists are saying the Quran is in error. This point is relevant because the Egyptians believed their living pharaoh to be corporeally divine, not just mere human rulers, as they were seen as the embodiment of gods, the mediator between the gods and the world of men. After death, the pharaoh became ethereally divine. So by being a close confidant and minister, the Haman of the Quran would have been linked with the living god Pharaoh's name and not with Amun, the king of the gods, or anyone else. It was stated earlier that the term chief quarry worker was not a unique title. In fact, it was a ubiquitous term in ancient Egypt, as there have been many who held this title. Also to be referred to as the chief or overseer of a stone quarry worker did not automatically infer an exclusive or high position. In this website called Facts and Details, the link is below, it pieces together numerous research and references. It says research had uncovered that the quarry labourers were divided into groups, and when speaking of an individual workman, the name of the chief under whom he worked was usually added, and that of the department to which he belonged. that at the head of each company of workmen stood a chief workman who bore the title of chief, but he was not very much above his people. Many other such articles explain this too. One more has been included here. In the book Life in Ancient Egypt, it says, and quote, direction of the quarrying work was placed in the hands of persons of somewhat lower standing. In the same book, it explains at times the title chief term was misapplied and misappropriated. So uncovering one hieroglyphic inscription with a name next to the term chief of stone quarry workers attached to it may not necessarily prove it is historically accurate as a standalone discovery. So the point remains, any discovery for the Quran's Haman should have had the title Chief of the King's Works, which relays a higher position than the mere Chief of the Stone Quarry Worker title. This is because the Quranic Haman was second in command to the Pharaoh, so he should have been expected to have the higher title rather than the lesser title. This was evidenced with others such as Himunu and Ankaif, both of whom were chief of the king's works when they were constructing the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest pyramid in Egypt. Also, so was Hui, called the chief of the king's works, and Hori, amongst many others who were part of the inner circle of the royal court. So in conclusion, Bukhail and his half-truth, botched, solipsistic research has a lot to answer for the mass hysteria amongst Muslims who are desperate for any kind of validation for their book. Bukhail's motive was not always for the pursuit of truth. Rather, he was paid vast fortunes by his employers, the ruling families of Saudi Arabia and other Arab leaders, to produce his books. This was covered in a previous video. In short, the hieroglyphs do not indicate the name found is definitely the same as the Quranic Haman with any measure of certainty. Until such time, Muslims will have to go back to the drawing board again and provide further evidence, instead of continually flooding the mass media with disinformation with the aim of misleading gullible people with their bogus miracle claims. These are the same Muslims who will demand the highest source of evidence and proof on any issues or points that goes against their religion, but are willing to accept the flimsiest claims without rigorousness or due diligence when something is purported to be in favor of their religion.